My dad called it the MidnightPaper. It was exactly what it sounded like. A strange kind of newspaper that would show up at some homes at midnight, on the dot, every Wednesday and Friday for us, but on other nights for other houses. I loved hearing about it. We would sit at his office late at night, late for me at that age, but that's all I did. Hear about it. I never saw one. He never told me any of the stories that were supposedly printed on it. So, after a while, I lost interest. Grew out of it. Until now. After the funeral, I decided to stay at my parents' for a while, see to their bills, thinking about what to do with the mountain of personal belongings that absolutely nobody would want. It was a Friday. Before I knew it, it was midnight. I had stayed up in the office, poring over a pile of unpaid hospital bills when I heard it. 3 knocks at the front door. I looked at my watch. Midnight, on the dot. Strange. I went to the front door, looked through the peephole. Nothing. No one. A series of likely scenarios ran through my mind. Maybe it was a kid playing Ding Dong Ditch. But then why didn't they ring the doorbell? I unlocked the front door and pulled it open slowly. There, on the worn welcome mat, was a newspaper. At least, that's what it looked like to me. Slowly, tentatively, I picked it up with 2 fingers, like it was covered in something toxic. It was entirely black, both the paper and the strings binding it into a roll. And then I made the worst mistake of my life. I took it inside. I sat at my dad's office desk with a knife from the kitchen. I used it to cut the knots on the black strings. And the newspaper unrolled itself slowly. It was thin, really only 1 page in length. There, on the only page written in blocky white letters, were the words, "The MidnightPaper." This was the headline on the page and the story written below it. Living and dying on the ledge. Urban legend or dangerous social media challenge. You may not have heard about it, but your kids have. There's a strange building on the edge of town. It's around 15 stories tall, and its rooftop holds a terrifying secret. The tenants know the story all too well. Last December, a girl, whose name the publication has chosen not to publish, attempted to take her own life by jumping off the rooftop and into the cold asphalt approximately 150 feet below. A tragic event, but unfortunately not too uncommon. But if you believe the word in online forums and instant messages, this was no ordinary attempt. Not because of these circumstances leading up to it, but because of what happened when the girl climbed over the railing separating safe rooftop concrete and fatal plunge. As soon as the girl lifted 1 foot off the edge, something strange happened. A series of images bombarded her mind. It was her father crying in her bedroom, surrounded by his daughter's belongings. Then it was her funeral. All her friends in suits and dresses with grief and pain racking their faces. And then it was her own body, or what was left of it, twisted and broken and bloated and covered in stitches, yet still crammed into a dress. The girl put her foot back on the edge, shocked out of her fatal decision. But then, for some reason, maybe to check if the images were only part of her imagination, she lifted her foot once more. The images came back, but this time they were different. It was her wearing a graduation gown. It was her in a college dorm. It was her with a boy. She hopped back over the railing and took the stairs down, the long way down, the safe way down. She told a friend who mockingly told another friend, and that friend told a few others. You know the rest. Someone posted it online and soon the internet ran with it. that building became a million others in a million different towns. And for some reason, people started trying it out. They would go out in groups to play what soon became known as the ledge game. If you stood on the edge of the rooftop on the wrong side of the railing and stuck 1 foot out, you could see your own future. One such group decided to try the game out, with disastrous consequences. One of the girls in the group chose to go first. She climbed over the railing, stuck 1 foot out, and soon regretted it. Her friends say she started screaming, her eyes wide and looking off into the distance as if seeing something horrifying. And then those eyes turned to look at her group of friends. She tried to grab one of them, as if trying to pull them over the railing with her, to take them with her as she fell. There was a funeral, with crying friends and a closed casket, much like the first girl saw. Instead of dissuading other teens from trying the game out, this news soon became an urban legend in its own right, growing into an indispensable part of the original tale. There's something many people can't stop thinking about. What did that girl see? Whatever it was bad enough for her to ignore the visions of her own funeral and her own mangled body. Whatever it was bad enough for her to try to take her own friend's life too. Some people say it was to spare her a fate worse than death. Maybe we'll never know. Or maybe, like in some versions of the story, we'll all know soon enough. Because the girl was pointing at the sky before she left, as if she could see something that nobody else could. That was the only story on the only page of the MidnightPaper. I wanted to know more, to know who wrote it, who published it, who delivered it. And I knew, like a piece of intoxicating and dangerous knowledge, that all I had to do to know more was wait for the next edition to hit the welcome mat. And I'll come back here to tell you all what it says. It's gone. The first MidnightPaper, which arrived last Friday, has somehow vanished. I put it in a drawer in my dad's study and now it's gone. Either someone broke in and stole it, or I don't know. It sounds ridiculous, but then again, this whole thing is. Maybe it disappeared on its own. After last time, I wanted to be prepared. Tonight, I set a chair by the front door and waited anxiously since 11 o'clock. Every time a car drove by, every time a leaf crunched on the asphalt outside, I rushed to the peephole. Nothing. The minutes dragged. Time seemed to stretch. I felt this feeling before when I ordered something I really wanted online, and I knew it was delivery day. But this was different. Something about this paper is just wrong. If anyone else has gotten one, you'd know. It feels like looking at something you're not meant to be seeing. Like it somehow slipped through the cracks, past all the rigid laws of ordinary life, and made its way to you. Holding one in your hand feels like you're touching a physical manifestation of a mistake. I imagine this is what it feels like when you touch something radioactive, as if every second that it's in your presence, it's somehow warping the very fabric of your life. 11:55. It's close. My heart's beating fast, the anticipation coursing through me like a drug. I stood in front of the people, not wanting to miss a second. I was looking at my front porch. The street outside was dark, and the front steps were illuminated only by the lights above the doorway. I had placed the welcome mat a little further away, so I could see it clearly through the peephole. And that's when it happened. The light above the doorway started to flicker slowly, and then faster and faster. Suddenly, it shut off completely. The entire porch was smothered in darkness, the only light coming from the streetlights outside. Somehow, the shadows around my doorstep were darker than the rest, as if swallowing every last hint of light. And then the light turned on again. Through the peephole, I could see that my front porch looked normal. The bulb above the doorway shone steadily, as if nothing had happened. I rushed, my fingers slamming against the lock, and I pulled the front door open. The front porch was empty. The street was empty. 1 second passed. 2. The normal sounds of the world around me started to seep back in. I looked down at the welcome mat and it was there. A bundle of black paper, wrapped tightly with black twine. I hesitated for a moment before grabbing it. Should I bring it inside? Should I read it out here? Should I read it at all? And then I grabbed it anyway. I had read one. That threshold had already been crossed. I took the paper into my dad's study and set it down on his desk. The knife from the kitchen was already there. All the pieces were in place. All I had to do was read it. I grabbed the knife, cut the twine, and watched the paper unfurl itself like a strange flower. Immediately, the white words jumped out at me and I started reading. There were a few pages this time, including the front cover, but still only one story. This is what was printed on those black pages. The removal doctor. Police warn of dangerous individual. After a spate of reports of a so-called removal doctor, local police urge residents to stay away from strangers who approach them in public places and to avoid abandoned buildings of any kind. It started a few months ago. The first report appeared on an online forum for reporting interactions with strange individuals, and this one certainly fit the bill. The anonymous user stated that she was walking across a public park just before closing time when a man approached her and introduced himself as the removal doctor. The woman wrote that at the time, the man seemed professional, reliable, and had a strange persuasiveness about him. The man gave the woman a card and walked off. She has since lost it, but according to her, the card simply had an address printed on either side. The next day, the woman decided to check the address out. She inputted it into a map application and arrived, only to discover that the building had long since been abandoned. Undeterred, she found an open door and walked in. The rest is internet history. Inside the building, the woman was greeted by what looked like a state-of-the-art clinic. The floors were epoxy and spotless. The walls were painted white, and there were tarps set up to cover any broken windows. There were even fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling. This was a far cry from the kill room the woman had imagined upon finding the abandoned location. But now her mind was wandering more toward an underground organ trafficking ring, and she was half right. The woman reports that she found the door to a clinic in the back of the building. She knocked and was welcomed inside. What was awaiting her was a consultation office straight out of a high-end hospital. There were doors to several rooms. One you could see was labeled as containing a CAT scan machine. Another was labeled as a dental office. In the center of the room was a desk, and behind that desk was the same man she had met in the public park. The woman was unable to describe him clearly in her post, only stating that the man was wearing a lab coat and that his face was hidden behind a surgical mask. The man wasted no time getting down to business. He introduced himself again as the removal doctor, and explained to her that he was in the business of removing things from the human body. Anything you can think of, he said. The woman was clearly unconvinced and somewhat alarmed, but the man assured her that it was a voluntary procedure, and one that had the potential to be life-saving. The doctor proceeded to ask the woman to name one thing about herself that she was unhappy with. A memory, a body part, an inconvenient habit. Anything. Even a tumor or a fatal condition such as cancer or a clogged artery. Online, the woman admits that she wasn't in her right mind. She was, after all, ignoring a million red flags that are staples of a dozen alleged accounts. Accounts that have transcended culture, time, and location, to become old wives' tales everyone has grown up with. Like waking up in a bathtub filled with ice, only to discover that your kidneys have been stolen, for example. Luckily, this wouldn't be the case for this woman, nor has it been the case for anyone who has encountered this strange man. There was no bathtub filled with ice, at least. The woman decided against asking to have anything physical removed, perhaps fearing that there were other parties listening in who were ready to act on her words right away. She did, however, state that she wouldn't mind parting with her crippling procrastination. The doctor nodded, as if he were expecting this answer, and then explained to her that this was an exchange. He would take something she didn't want about herself, but he could pick anything of hers that he wanted in return. The woman was hesitant but ultimately agreed, allowing the man to lead her to a private examination room. The woman claims that a few hours later she woke up in the same building, but everything around her was different. The floor was filthy concrete, the walls were covered in chip paint, and there was no examination rooms or medical equipment of any kind. She stated that she immediately chastised herself mentally for falling for a trick a child could see through. After quickly checking herself for stitches or wounds, she was unable to find any mark on her skin. Not even a bruise, she wrote. It was only a few days later that she realized that something actually had happened to that building. She is a writer, and she was unable to start working before hours upon hours of watching YouTube videos and playing mobile games. But now, she could sit and get to work immediately. It really did seem like the removal doctor had surgically removed her procrastination. She was elated, but only at first. Soon she realized that something was wrong. First, it happened when she was in a video chat with her sister and her newborn, and then it happened when her girlfriend arrived at their apartment. Finally, she confirmed her fears in front of their bathroom mirror. No matter how hard she tried or for how long, she was unable to smile. Dozens of doctor's appointments later, the cause is still unknown. Some of them have said that it may be a mild facial paralysis caused by stress, but I know better, the woman wrote. She's convinced it was the removal doctor. I hate him, she wrote in her post. Everyone used to say that I had the nicest smile, and now it's gone. But why take her smile? The woman described her last moments of consciousness just as the removal doctor administered an IV filled with anesthetic. She spotted a room off to one side. The room was half open, and she could see a gurney with a blanket over it. It was obvious that, given the size and the shape of what was underneath it, that it was a person. But the shape was wrong. Parts were missing, she wrote. The shape was off, but it had a head and two legs. There were jars along the far wall, jars with all manner of body parts. There are nights, the woman wrote, where she dreams she's back in that strange clinic. Nights where she's convinced she remembers part of what happened when she was under. She spots grotesque and bizarre surgical tools through blurry eyes. Hears the doctor muttering to himself. Hears him say that something or someone is almost complete. Other stories about the removal doctor's patients have surfaced. One man who claimed to have asked the doctor to remove his addiction to cigarettes had his tongue removed as well. Another man who asked to have his fear of heights removed had his ability to drive taken. A man with a brain tumor asked for it to be removed, only to wake up without one of his legs. A woman asked for her depression to be removed, and lost one of her eyes in the process. One of the accounts spreading the rumor even claimed that a missing person who was found without his head was one of the doctor's victims. Still, when asked what, if anything, this person may have asked to have removed, this anonymous poster couldn't say. Whatever it was, it had to be huge. Maybe something that he and a large group of people shared. like a fear or a financial condition. Speculation abounds in most of these reports, but this headless corpse shares something in common with all other alleged reports. In all cases, there are no stitches, no wounds, no scars of any kind. Whatever the doctor took, it was as if it had never existed. This fact has baffled both law enforcement and medical professionals looking into these reports. This publication would like to remind you of the police department's request. If a man approaches you with a business card and introduces himself as the removal doctor, remove yourself from the situation immediately and call 911 when at a safe distance to report your sighting. Do not, under any circumstances, go to the address on the card. Do not, under any circumstances, ask for something to be removed from your body or your personality. You will lose something in return. I put the paper down, confusion growing through my brain like a strange kind of infection. I could feel my heart beating faster again. I knew something was wrong, not just because of what was written on the pages or how the paper was delivered. A few internet searches later and I found out I was right. There were no reports online of a removal doctor or a ledge game either. So why were the articles mentioning their presence on the internet and the media? Was the writer of these articles just making these reports up? I still don't know, but it doesn't feel like it. These stories don't feel fake. They feel real, like they're happening close by. I decided to take a few photos of the paper with my phone, and soon realized that this wasn't an easy process. It was like there was something on the page that reacted badly with the camera lens. I tried taking a photo with the flash on and off, but it made no difference. The picture was ruined either way. I'll put the photo along with the news article on the screen. I hope it serves as a way to both prove my story and also to document each paper if they also go missing. If what my dad has said was true, I've made a grave mistake. Never read one, he told me once. I asked him why, but he wouldn't say. He just changed the subject or blurted out, "Just don't," or "because." Eventually, I thought he was just trying to scare me, and forgot all about it. Now, I wish I had asked him more about the MidnightPaper, about why I should never have read it, about whether or not I should even touch it or bring it inside. All I know is that my dad said the paper arrived on Wednesdays and Fridays at our home, so there'll be another one coming Friday night. It seems like it's too soon, too overwhelming, but I'm going to keep going, to keep documenting it. And next time, I want to try to have the door open when the shadow shows up once again. After the second paper arrived on Wednesday, I decided to keep a close watch on it. I tried taking more pictures, but it seems that trying to take that first one ruined my cell phone camera. I'm looking into getting it fixed. I set the second MidnightPaper down on a work table and stared, watching it for any slight change. Hours passed. My eyes grew heavy. Exhaustion seemed to settle into every cell of my body, heavy as lead. It was 5 a.m. on a Thursday morning when I first started to see it. There were wisps of black smoke rising from the black pages. I leaned closer, covering my nose and mouth with a face mask to avoid inhaling the smoke. It seemed like the black paper itself was burning up, but there was no fire. The pages were just beginning to curl up and float away, disintegrating into fine smoke before my very eyes. My phone rang. It was work. I ignored it. I had to keep looking. By noon, the cover page was gone. The pages beneath it were already curling up too. By 10 p.m., there was only one page left. And by midnight on Thursday, it was gone. One day, the paper had stuck around for 24 hours and then disintegrated. Suddenly, I was very glad to have taken that picture, regardless of my broken camera. I went off to sleep and dreamt of black smoke and white ink. Friday. Another paper was coming at midnight. I wasn't ready for another one. I was exhausted, scared, but also oddly excited. This was weird. Weird in a way unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was like there was a secret, invisible world that had existed beyond my mundane life. And now that I had stumbled upon it, I didn't want to go back. I didn't get reprimanded at work, but there was some tension when I logged on Friday. Whatever, they wouldn't understand. I would like to see how they would react if they got a midnight paper on their doorstep. 11:50 p.m. I sat on my front porch. The front door shut behind me, the welcome mat a few feet in front of me. I had swapped out the bulb above me for a new one, just in case. At 11:55 p.m., the hairs on my neck stood up. There seemed to be a strange electricity in the air. There was a chill too. One that felt like it went deeper than my skin, like it was wrapping around my bones. At 11:58, a metallic taste filled my mouth, like sucking on a penny. At 11:59, my eyes began to sting in water, as if I was standing in front of a bonfire. And then it happened. The light bulb didn't flicker. It just shut off abruptly. I was ready. My phone was in my hands. With a few taps, I brought out the flashlight. A patch of darkness, even deeper than the one around me, appeared over the welcome mat. I brought the flashlight over it and could just about see the black bundle. And then my phone went from being cold to the touch to searing hot in the blink of an eye. I dropped it, hearing glass shatter. The odd thing was, I heard it before it hit the ground. The air around me seemed to disappear. I wasn't breathing oxygen anymore. I wasn't breathing anything. My eyes bulged, my throat spasmed in protest. And then the light popped back on and it was done. The air around me was the same as it had been just moments before. I coughed, my lungs screaming for oxygen. I swallowed it in gulps, lightheaded. The dark tentacles of a migraine already wrapping themselves around my brain like a vice. I pushed through it. I needed to see if the paper was there. I needed to know if my interference had caused it to be taken away. I sighed. It was there. The same black bundle tied with the same black twine. I brought it into my dad's study, used the knife to cut the twine, and unfurled the rolled up papers. Again, it was one article, but it was longer this time. And this is what was printed on the black pages. The new kid. Jailed teacher tells bizarre tale. Former English teacher Mark Bailey, found guilty of murder last winter, sat in the visitation room of a maximum security prison. He looked gaunt, pale, haunted. He was a far cry from the young, athletic man that was a constant presence of millions of television and phone screens across the nation. Bailey seemed to have it all. He had taught at Ralston High School for almost a decade. He was well liked, with many students citing him as the reason they discovered a passion for literature. He was the coach of not only Ralston High's girls volleyball team, but also the town's Little League team. He was married to his high school sweetheart, Holly Bailey, a kindergarten teacher. On the outside, his life was not just innocuous, but downright inspirational. It's a well-known fact that instead of traveling to Europe or Hawaii for their honeymoon, he and Holly opted to join the Peace Corps to volunteer in Africa. So, where did it all go wrong? What transformed the Mark Bailey from 5 years ago, a well-loved coach and volunteer, into the Mark Bailey who must now be separated from the prison's general population for his own safety? The answer has a name. Stephanie Carson. Carson was a senior who attended Herrick's High School. She was popular, smart, the star player of the girls' volleyball team, and already accepted into several Ivy League schools. Stephanie's promising life was cut short when, after a few weeks of stalking so severe, she had placed a restraining order on him. Bailey broke into the Carson family home and attacked her with a knife. Bailey's trial was a lightning-fast affair. The evidence stacked against him so completely it left no room for interpretation. Yet, there were so many online who rallied to defend him, citing his strange, disjointed testimony as evidence for mental illness. "You don't understand," said Bailey in court. "She's not what you think. You'll see. Just wait for the new school year to start. If I had more time, maybe I would have put an end to it." After being reminded that Stephanie is now deceased, Bailey exploded into a series of bizarre statements and accusations, many directed at Stephanie's parents. After several months of being blocked by Bailey's court-appointed psychologist, we were able to secure an interview with him. Sitting behind the glass in a beige jumpsuit that seemed to be several sizes too big, Bailey spoke into the phone mounted next to the window, his voice a distorted whisper. Almost immediately, as if knowing what we were there to ask about, he launched into his story. "Her name was Monica first, Monica Campbell, so that's how I think of her. She was the new kid that year. She had moved here from California, or so she said. She was instantly popular, pretty, from a family with a lot of money. She was at the top of every class, straight A's, 4.0 GPA. She came to the first volleyball practice and everyone could see that she would become the best player on the team. And she was in my English class too, and she seemed to know more than I did. Could quote Yeats on the spot. Oscar Wilde was her favorite though. She got into Yale, Stanford too, but went to Yale for chemistry. A bright kid. She was even homecoming queen. There was something about her, like a spark. Monica was almost too bright, strangely intelligent. She seemed to be able to learn things right away and remember every little detail later. My car broke down once right in school. There must have been at least a dozen teachers trying to help out. Harrison, the science teacher, was fiddling with the motor when Monica walked right up. She looked down at the engine, rolled up her sleeves like a frickin' mechanic, and started working on it. She fixed it. The car started right away. She apparently spoke Japanese, German, French, and Spanish. We could only verify the Spanish and the French, but she spoke them fluently. A few teachers cried when she left, saying that they would miss hearing her laugh in the hallway. She made a big impression, obviously. I don't know about her parents. I think her mom came to school once or twice, dressed like she was attending the Oscars or something. But we didn't see her after that, or the father, not even at the graduation. Monica was a valedictorian. It was the year after that things got weird. The first semester had just started when there was a new kid in school again. Her name was Natalie Creed. She had moved here from California. She was instantly popular, pretty, from a family with a lot of money. She was at the top of every class, straight A's, 4.0 GPA. She came to the first volleyball practice and everyone could see that she would become the best player on the team. She was in my English class too, and she knew more than I did. Could quote Shakespeare on the spot. Emily Dickinson was her favorite, and she looked just like Monica. Everyone asked if she was related to her. She said no, but there were rumors. Maybe she was a cousin or a lost sibling. Her parents didn't come to school either. She was valedictorian, the homecoming queen too. She got into Harvard and NYU, went to Harvard for chemistry. It was weird. Everyone said so, but they seemed to forget right away. I was the only one who kept saying how strange it was. That made them look at me like I was crazy, or worse, so I let it slide. The year after that, we were at a volleyball game at a different school, and there she was again. Her name wasn't Monica or Natalie anymore. It was Jennifer Cook. She was the best player on that team, better by far than anyone on ours. I knew something was wrong, but even asking about her made people look at me like I was sick. There were enough stories about teachers becoming obsessed with one of their students for all the wrong reasons, but it wasn't like that to me. She looked the same. She acted the same. She always went off to study chemistry. So, I followed her home. And the house was one of the biggest in town, and we're in Long Island. It wasn't Monica's house, but, well, it could have been. And then I saw her, the mom. Monica's mom. I knew something was wrong, but when I told my wife, she told me that I was losing it, that I couldn't follow anyone home, let alone a high school student. I was a teacher, for God's sake. The year ended, and when the new year started, I went looking for her. I went to every school in the area, and I found her. Her name was now Stephanie Carson. She looked the same as Jennifer Cook, the same as Natalie Creed, the same as Monica Campbell. It wasn't just her looks. She sounded like her, moved like her, played volleyball like her. I followed her home again. It was a different house, but the same tax bracket. I waited until nightfall and then snuck in. A window was wide open. There weren't any family photos on the walls, just art. The house was fully furnished, not a fake house or anything. They must have been moving for real. Nobody was home yet, so I looked everywhere. I had to find an explanation. The door down to the basement was open, and that's where I found it. It was a lab. There were machines I couldn't even recognize. A freezer the size of the wall with frozen petri dishes and test tubes inside. There were also weird books. Astronomy, occultism, demonology. And then she snuck up on me. Quiet. She must have hit me with something because I blacked out. I woke up in the hospital handcuffed to a gurney. The police were there, my wife wasn't. They said that Monica, Stephanie, was putting a restraining order on me, that I had been following her for weeks. They didn't seem to know that I had broken in. Maybe she didn't want them to. My wife wasn't home when I got back. She didn't answer my calls either. A few weeks later, I went back to the house around 4 a.m. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew she would be asleep. Maybe I could get her to talk somehow. I wasn't really thinking straight. I broke in again, through the same window. I went down to the basement and it was empty. Totally empty. Just bare concrete and drag marks where things had been taken out. I was furious. She was hiding things to make me look worse. I could almost imagine her having those things taken out with a condescending smile on her face. I went up the stairs. I thought her room had to be one of these smaller ones, but when I opened it, I was all wrong. There were 2 sets of clothes in the closet. The bathroom was set up for 2 people. It was the parents' room. I checked the other small room, but it was completely empty. There was nothing on the walls, nothing on the carpeted floor, nothing in the closet. Only the master bedroom was left. But why would they give the master bedroom to their daughter? I opened the door. She was sitting up in bed, waiting for me, with a smile on her face. I asked her who she really was. I told her I knew she had been in my class, in my volleyball team, in my school. She just said one thing, and it was enough to make me lose control. That wasn't me. I pulled her off the bed, dragged her down the stairs, and I was going to show her the basement, you see. But it went wrong. She was faster than me, stronger than me too. She forced my fingers apart and rushed for the kitchen. And then she just waited by the knives, like she was inviting me to use one. So I pulled one out. She smiled again, and so I stabbed her. And then again, and then again. She was still smiling when the police showed up. Later, they said that she had called them, that she had gotten away for a few moments and called them from the bathroom. But that was a lie. She must have called them before I went up to her room. Her parents were at the trial, and that's when I knew. They didn't look sad, just annoyed, like I had broken one of their toys. It was the parents, you see. They're behind this. I should have waited for them. I should have killed them instead. Bailey became frantic when the interview was coming to a close, like a castaway watching a ship fade into the distance. Look, it's up to you. Go to every high school in Long Island. You've got to find her, she'll be there. She's blonde, blue eyes. She must be about to graduate now. Follow her home. Get to the parents. Get them talking. You've got to find out why. Bailey was found in his cell a few days later. He had chewed through both of his wrists. The damage was so severe that he bled out before he got to the infirmary. Nobody involved with this publication fulfilled his last request, and we urge our readers to ignore it as well. I read through the paper a couple of times. Long Island, not too far from where I live, but I had never heard of this case. A murder like that, a trial like that, involving a teacher and a student, I would have heard of it. By the time that I was done reading, it was almost 2 a.m. I collapsed into bed and I fell asleep, my mind still filled with the black pages, and with what that shadow that had left me on the doorstep. I spent most of Saturday in front of my computer, typing different variations of Mark Bailey and the names that he had given in the article. Nothing. I was only met with seemingly thousands of Facebook profiles, no articles, no headlines, no memorial pages. Yesterday, I turned my attention toward the first 2 articles. I scoured the internet, finding only medical ads and urban legend games. No mention of the ledge game. No mention of the removal doctor. I decided to go for a walk. It was late, almost midnight actually, but I didn't have to worry about that. The next paper was due Wednesday night. I walked toward the nice part of town, where there always seemed to be new businesses and new buildings going up. The cold air felt nice on my forehead, where the seeds of another migrant were already growing. And then I saw it. It was something so striking, so unmistakable, that it drove the pain out of my head in an instant of blinding shock. I was looking at one of the new apartment buildings that had gone up last year. It was already well populated. I could see the checkerboard pattern of lit up windows and dark rooms. Nothing out of the ordinary, until you looked at the rooftop. There was a tiny silhouette standing there, at the edge of the rooftop, on the ledge. I rushed toward the building. I was maybe 1 block away. I wasn't thinking about the distance, about the difference in height, about the fact that my voice wouldn't be able to carry all the way up there. I was only thinking about that silhouette, about how it was almost exactly what I had pictured when I read my first MidnightPaper. The building's lobby was dark. The front desk appeared to be empty. The glass double doors were immovable. There was an e-card reader on the wall next to them. I couldn't get in. I backed up, standing in the middle of the street. I craned my neck and there it was. The little shadow in the shape of a person standing on the ledge, quivering and shaking under the pressure of high-velocity wind. They were standing on one leg. The other was dangling over the ledge. I started to shout, but the sound died in my throat, because the person was already a blur. I closed my eyes, but I felt it anyway. Felt it more than I heard it. It wasn't just a bang. It wasn't just a crack. It was something you feel in your bones. Something that stabs you in the stomach and scoops all the feeling out of your legs. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't bring myself to look at the body. I just watched the red rivulets snake their way into the gutter. The ledge game. It was real. It was real now. 11:50 p.m. I sat behind the front door this time. The last few days had been bad enough for me to be a little more cautious. I was still taking aspirin to stave off the migraine that started as soon as the porch lights went out on Friday night. I wasn't taking any more chances. There have been many comments asking me not to be outside when the paper comes. That's what caused the ledge game to become real. I don't know. I also don't know if the people who say that it was my act of reading the papers that is changing things. But I can't stop. Not yet. I need to read the paper to understand it. To understand how much my father knew and how it affected him. I lost touch with my dad. The funeral was hard on him, hard on all of us. He retreated after that. Wouldn't even want me over for Thanksgiving or Christmas. One thing he said back then that I've been thinking about was, it's my fault. Did he mean the midnight paper? Did he think reading had done something to Mom? Now he's gone too. The doctor said he sustained several injuries. Some of them were old, already healed. Self-harm was suspected, as was some sort of mental breakdown. When I got here, most of the mirrors were either covered up, removed, or smashed. His TV screen was covered with cardboard and hidden under a comforter. I'm still looking through my dad's notebooks. He must have had hundreds of them. Most don't even make any sense. Just scrambled words that I have a hard time deciphering because of his handwriting. 11:59 p.m. It was time. Once again, I didn't feel ready. Once again, I felt like I was doing something stupid, but I didn't have a choice. At midnight on the dot, the porch light went out. Through the keyhole, I could see the already familiar patch of darkness form on the welcome mat. And then I blinked and the lights were on again. There where it always was a brand new edition of the midnight paper. I opened the front door and hesitated. I was looking at that bundle of bound black pages with the same kind of cautious respect reserved for dangerous animals and predatory pieces of machinery. You don't put your hand anywhere close to a meat grinder. You don't try to grab a rat or a raccoon with your bare hands. But I walked over and grabbed the midnight paper anyway. The second I felt its pages touch my skin, I thought that I should have worn gloves. Whatever, it probably didn't make a difference. I was going to read it, and that was probably worse. I repeated what was quickly becoming a sort of ritual. I took the paper inside, set it down on the work table in my dad's office, and used the knife from the kitchen to cut the twine. The paper unfurled itself slowly, and the headline popped out at me. The Hunger, Mass Hysteria, or Unknown Condition. After a bizarre series of events that spanned only a few days, government officials and healthcare professionals are struggling to treat the residents of a small town in upstate New York. At their request, the name of the town is being withheld from all publications. It started slowly. A few strange reports started trickling into the social media accounts of many of the town's residents. Some were presented as cute. My little guy was so hungry he got into the pantry and ate half of his new cereal box, wrote one young mother. Others were presented as comedic. If I eat another burger, I'm gonna end up like that purple brat from Willy Wonka, wrote one girl. Lastly, on that first day, some people were writing in concern. My baby won't stop drinking milk. 4 bottles and still crying like he's hungry. What should I do? It seemed that slowly, everyone in town was coming down with a monstrous case of hunger. Delivery orders skyrocketed. Supermarkets became crowded. With each passing hour, it seemed that nobody was immune to the sudden onset of paradoxical hunger, and it was getting worse. People stuck at home ate through their entire bodies. Some even ate raw spices and garbage. Whatever was at hand, they tried to swallow. Anything to quell that bottomless, nagging, painful feeling in their stomachs. The town's residents hardly slept the first few nights, choosing instead to continue eating anything they could get their hands on. Soon, concepts of self-restraint and societal norms seemed to crumble away. Restaurant staff let customers unattended and raided the kitchen and even the freezer, eating food and ingredients raw. Local businesses that served no food were abandoned, and those that did serve it were overrun. People could scarcely make it out the front door, sitting on these sidewalks with their bounty and eating through it on the spot. The town's only hospital was filled to the brim. The lucky few who were able to get a doctor to themselves or put through a gauntlet of medical tests. Every possible avenue was pursued, from parasites such as tapeworms to neurological conditions, to psychological breakdowns, and they all came back lacking evidence. The town's water supply was tested for anything out of the ordinary, with nothing to show for it. It wasn't long before violence erupted. Food was running out and anything, even dog food, even the dumpsters behind butcher shops, even pet store cages were now viable options. People were trading blows over scraps on the street. Soon, fists and blunt objects weren't enough. It wasn't long before someone pulled a knife or a firearm. But knives and firearms were to be expected, to some extent. What wasn't expected, what was downright unspeakable, was when people started using their teeth. It was less than a week before it happened, and once it did, it was as if a line had been crossed. One person did it, so it became an option for everyone else. Bundles of discarded, bloodied clothing became a common sight. The residents were soon joined by several out-of-towners, concerned family members and friends, law enforcement agencies, and medical experts. Most of these people were never seen again, and those that were had already joined in. Through it all, a few social media accounts remained active. Most of them were incoherent or entirely mute, simply liking anything related to food, and soon just liking anything that showed a person or a pet. One account, however, contained just enough coherent writing to quote in this publication. "Everything you eat has a soul." The anonymous user posted, "You consume it when you eat it. We can eat much more now. Eat something and take it into ourselves. We can eat life itself if we keep going. Some are eating the ground and becoming this place. If the sun came down, we could eat it too." Reports from the town have since gone dark. Local law enforcement agencies have established a barricade around the area, effectively cutting the town off from the rest of the world. There have been sightings of the military as well, with some rumors even stating that gunshots and explosions have been heard. It's troubling then that there has been a trend of social media posts of uncontrollable hunger from surrounding towns in the area. Government officials have stated that there's nothing to worry about, that these posts are a part of a social media frenzy, a sick joke, said a representative whose name has since been pulled. The people in the town are being treated, and there's absolutely no danger of other towns succumbing to the same condition. As soon as I was done reading, I backed away from my dad's desk as if it had suddenly caught on fire. This one was worse. Worse than the ledge game. Worse than the removal doctor. Worse than the new kid. If this one became real, it was unthinkable. Horrible. I grabbed a garbage bag from the kitchen and used the knife to push the midnight paper and the pieces of twine into it. I took the bag into my dad's backyard and pulled the grill's cover off. The midnight paper made a dull smack as it landed on the grill's metal bars. I screwed the cap off and flipped the bottle over. Before the lighter fluid even left the nozzle, the black pages began curling up and breaking into tiny motes and floating away. I sprayed the lighter fluid anyway, but by the time it hit the grill, there was nothing left. The midnight paper had vanished in seconds, breaking up into pieces so small that I couldn't even see them fly away. I collapsed onto my dad's living room chair, the migraine already back at full blast. You were right. I shouldn't have read it. I should have listened to my dad. Because when I turned the TV on, it was set to the news, and they were talking about several encounters with a strange man who claimed to be a doctor. It was Friday night, 10 to midnight. I knew that right now the newest edition of the Midnight Paper would be hitting my parents' welcome mat in a few moments. But I wasn't there. I decided after last time that I wasn't going to be reading the next article. What if it contained something worse than the hunger? I couldn't let it become real. I didn't want any more blood on my hands. I sat at the rickety table included in my motel room. Every time I hit a key on my laptop, the table rattled, tilting toward its short leg, which I couldn't identify for the life of me. I didn't mind. I was counting the minutes with each time I hit refresh on the search page of Herrick's High School's website. On the search bar was the name, Stephanie Carson. I got the Midnight Paper with the Ledge Game article on Friday, September 11th at midnight. 1 week later on Friday, September 18th at midnight, I had witnessed a girl jumping off a building to end her life. I read the Midnight Paper with the Removal Doctor article on Wednesday, September 16th at midnight. 1 week later on Wednesday, September 22nd at midnight, I had first heard about the Removal Doctor on the local news. That means that it takes 1 week between getting a Midnight Paper and the article in it becoming true. If I was right, that night at midnight, Stephanie Carson would become real. She would suddenly appear in the Herrick's High School website as if she was always enrolled there. No memorial service, no news about a tribute or a plaque going up in her honor. Just a page or two about the school's most gifted student. Midnight. Just as I hit refresh, I heard 3 knocks on my motel room door. What? No, it couldn't. But it was. I opened my door and there, on the patch of filthy rug right in front of my room, was a bundle of black paper bound in black twine. I grabbed a plastic bag that held the snacks I had bought at a gas station, put on a pair of rubber gloves, and grabbed a pair of grill tongs. The Midnight Paper dangled off the teeth of the tongs, its strange electricity still somehow crackling through the rubber and making the hairs on my hands stand up. I dropped the paper into the plastic bag and tied it into a tight knot, and then I dropped the bag into another 2 bags for good measure and tossed them into a dumpster by the ice machine. By the time that I got back, the crappy motel internet had finally loaded the page. 10 results for Stephanie Carson. I gripped the sides of the crappy motel table. Would I be too late? Was it tonight? A few minutes later, I opened my motel room door cautiously. The patch of filthy carpet was empty. No new Midnight Paper. I smiled. Maybe I'd gotten rid of it entirely. Maybe not reading one was all it took for it to leave you alone. I went right to the dumpster. The bags that I had hidden the Midnight Paper in were still there. They hadn't mysteriously vanished. I nodded and got in my car. By the time I got to the right part of town, the night was cold and bright. Streetlights glinted off of every surface, bouncing off 1,000 reflective surfaces and zeroing in on my eyes. The migraine was back in full swing. I was a little used to it by now. I chugged a bit more of my soda and narrowed my eyes. I had a long night ahead of me. I stopped the car and unplugged my phone from its stand on the dashboard. On the screen was something I wasn't proud of at all. Stephanie Carson's Instagram account. It had taken me less than an hour to find it. I won't write it here, but her username was a simple combination of her name and her volleyball jersey number. It wasn't set to private either. A little scrolling had led me to a photo of Stephanie and her friends in front of a house that could only be described as excessive. It was as close to Cinderella's castle as you could get, while still being attached to a sidewalk. I didn't know the exact address, but there was a photo of her in front of a street sign with the same group of friends, wearing the same clothes as before. It was easy to guess that they had taken the photo in front of Stephanie's house, and the photo of the street sign back to back. That same street sign was in front of me now, and a few feet away from it was Cinderella's castle itself, and one of the lights upstairs was on. I walked around the block more than a few times, trying to get my story straight. I had to warn Stephanie about Mark Bailey, who she already knew about. But then she asked me how I knew what I did, and I was still working that part out. I could show her my post on here, but knocking on a girl's door and telling her that I had posted on Reddit about her murder, yeah. No, I would be in a straitjacket before the morning. Whatever, I didn't need to make sense. I didn't even need to tell her about the post. I could simply knock on her door and tell her that I had driven by and seen a strange man peering through her window. She would think that I had spotted Bailey and would probably call the cops on him. Problem solved. And then why not call the cops myself? Because they would ask questions, but she would too. I sighed. There was seemingly no way to do this without looking as creepy as Mark Bailey himself. I walked up to the front door, held my breath and knocked. The sound seemed explosive in the darkness, but that was probably just the lateness of the hour amplifying every sound 100 times over. Still, no sound or movement or light came from inside. I knocked again, a little louder this time. A few seconds later, nothing had changed. I was out of options. I bit the bulletin. I stabbed the doorbell with my finger. The electronic chime echoed through the house, about as subtle as a carpet bombing. One light went on, two, and then the whole first floor lit up. I heard muted little footsteps from behind the door, as if someone was walking on a carpet. And then the latch turned and the door swung open, and something hit me on the head. "Wake up, creeper," a girl's voice said. I opened my eyes, and then shut them immediately. The brief glimpse of the world I had gotten had been enough. It was white and blurred. Something cold and hard collided with my cheek, shooting fireworks across my vision. I said, "Wake up." I opened my eyes again. This time the world was a little less blurry. I blinked until the person in front of me came into focus. There, holding what looked like some kind of a metal sculpture, was Stephanie Carson. "There you are," she said matter-of-factly. "I was worried I hit you a little too hard. So, you want to tell me why you've been walking outside my house for the past hour and a half?" "Mark Bailey," I said, my voice raspy and a little more than a whisper. There was a metallic taste in my mouth that seemed to extend into my lungs. Jesus, maybe she had hit me a little too hard. "Oh great, my stalker has a friend." "No, not a friend. He's going to kill you tonight." That had come out a little more clearly. I would have been pleased with myself. But it was around that time that I noticed that I couldn't feel my hands. One look down and I could see why. My wrists were stuck to my arms of a chair with a ridiculous amount of duct tape. Jeez, had she used one roll for each hand? And then Stephanie said something that made me forget about how my hands were already turning purple. "I know." "What?" I asked, my voice sounding distant and slow as if it was coming from a broken speaker on the other side of the room. "He's been stalking me for a long time. He broke in last week and I got a restraining order on him. He's close to figuring it out, I can tell. And he's close to losing his shit too. It's gonna get violent. Whatever. I figure if anyone's going to do it, it might as well be him." I thought back to something Mark Bailey had said in the article. Something I thought that had just been the ramblings of a convicted murderer. Stephanie had gotten loose and had stood next to the kitchen knives instead of running away, like she was inviting Bailey to use them on her. I cleared my throat. "Aren't you going to stop him? Don't you want to?" Stephanie rolled her eyes like I was annoying her. Scratch the like, I was annoying her. "I'll come back anyways." "Well, not me, but it doesn't really matter. It might make my parents look back at me, this version of me twice. Now, we just gotta figure out what to do with you. If my parents get back, they'll get rid of you and stick you in an acid barrel." "What? Parents?" "They're what I call the fake parents that live here. Like, aren't my parents, get it? They're drones. Mindless versions, not the real deal. Do I have to explain everything to you? So, if I cut you loose, will you leave quietly? But what about Mark? Oh, screw Mark Bailey. What does it even matter? You think I'm the first one of me to die? The first one to want to? I was speechless. That was the last thing I expected her to say. I can't feel my hands, I said finally. Stephanie nodded. She grabbed a pair of scissors from her desk next to me, and that was the first time I thought to look around. The walls were white, clinical. There were tables upon tables filled with lab equipment around us. It was like a high-end research lab, the kind of place that might be responsible for creating a deadly virus, or resurrecting dinosaurs, or making multiple versions of the same teenage girl. Stephanie cut the tape around my wrist. I winced. The blood shooting back through my bruised wrist felt like acid. You can't let Bailey kill you, I said, rising slowly. Who are you anyway? A teacher at Roslyn. Didn't you go to Roslyn? I asked. No, that was Monica and Natalie. Stupid of them to send two of us to the same school, right? No wonder Bailey lost his marbles. So you're not the same person. Wow, you're all questions, aren't you? You haven't even answered mine. I told her my name, and then went about explaining everything I could about the MidnightPaper and my posts online. I let her read through them on my phone. It was then that I saw it, that strange intelligence that Bailey had mentioned. Her face came alive and I could almost see millions of hyper-complex gears turning in her mind. A wormhole might explain it, she said finally and then shook her head. Scratch that. Simulation. Wormhole are stupid. Only, You said you got a paper tonight, right? And that it was still in the dumpster. Yeah, I said, catching up. Let me take a look at it. I don't think that's a good idea. Neither was touching the thing, breathing its fumes or trying to burn it, Stephanie said. Yeah, I guess you got a point. We moved from one room in the basement to another, and I saw these shelves filled with the occult books that Mark Bailey had mentioned. Those are mine, Stephanie said. Can't rule anything out, right? I shrugged, not sure what she was talking about. And then I checked my phone and my heart stopped. 4 a.m. Mark Bailey was due any second. Stephanie didn't seem to notice. She was moving so fast, she was practically a blur. By the time I had gotten to the foot of the stairs, she was already in the kitchen. That was when I heard it. A man's voice. Mark Bailey's voice. What are you? He asked. You're Monica, then. As quickly as it appeared, Bailey's voice was cut short. I rushed up the stairs and slid into the kitchen. There on the tile floor, Mark Bailey lay in a pool of his own blood. His neck was cut open. Stephanie tossed a bloody knife into the sink. Don't worry, she said. My errands will take care of it. Where'd you park your car? It was almost dawn by the time we were standing in front of the dumpster. I pulled the plastic bags out and cut them open slowly, with a pair of scissors from the lab. Stephanie's face lit up the second she saw the black bundle roll out. Before I could stop her, she ripped the twine off and unrolled the paper. And then she frowned. She turned the paper toward me. Can you read it? She asked. I nodded. I can't see anything, just black paper. No words written in white ink. I bet whoever appears in the articles can't read them, because I'm not real. The paper must have created me like you thought. She was actually smiling as she said it. Doesn't that bother you? No, are you kidding me? I'm thrilled. I would much rather be created by a mysterious newspaper than my frickin' parents. Read it to me, she ordered. Some of the words were already being erased, but I read the article to her anyway. This is what it said. The perfect being. Experts call aerial phenomenon easy to explain. It's only been 2 days, but the residents of a small town in upstate New York have already grown accustomed to it. There's a strange shape in the sky that isn't going away, and it looks like a person. The event began sometime after dawn on redacted morning. It's now redacted. And the clouds aren't going anywhere. It's not just a shape, says Redacted, a lifelong resident of Redacted. There's light in there. Like no matter how dark it gets, there's something in there that's shining, like a little sun. The apparition is certainly uncanny. It's a little shape that looks like a person in the sky. It has all the parts you would expect. A head, 2 arms, complete with their hands, and 2 legs plus their feet. The arms and legs are pointed at an angle so they make an X shape. It looks like the Da Vinci Man, one woman said. And she's not the only one. Many people have drawn the comparison between the man-shaped object and Da Vinci's iconic Vitruvian Man. If this was only an oddly shaped object, it wouldn't have made as big of an impact on the residents. Indeed, there's a strange glow to it, as it reflects the sunlight in such a way that the entire human shape is lit up at once. When the sun goes down, the glow remains, shining like a big star that often hides behind thick clouds. This is an age where everyone has a smartphone in their pocket, a gadget that doubles as an expensive camera. So, why haven't you heard of this before? The answer's simple. It's too far away. It's about the size of a fingernail, a resident explained. Just hold your little finger up in the sky and imagine something floating up there that's as big as a nail. That's not very big at all. A photography expert explained that most phone cameras aren't the best at taking photos of something that small at a distance, especially against a bright sky. As a result, most of the images that have made their way to social media show a blurry speck against a blazing white sky. At night, the results are even worse, at best capturing a circle of light, at worst simply showing a dark sky. Meteorologists and astronomers and aficionados of aerial phenomena have indeed regarded the apparition as a trick of the light. I think it's a kite, said a local man who owns a high-end telescope. Some kind of man-shaped kite that someone let go of, maybe as a prank. A meteorologist stated that it's easy to explain. It could be any number of things ranging from drones to homemade balloons. It's nothing natural though. Certainly not a meteor and definitely not a sign of the end times. So, how exactly did this apparition become known as the perfect being? A local news station was interviewing a group of onlookers when they were approached by a strange man. There was something off about him for sure, stated Redacted, a veteran field reporter who wasn't shaken up by weirdos. He just walked up to the camera when we were interviewing another eyewitness and said that he made it and that it's the perfect being. A weirdo, a kook. We get too many to count. But it caught on, mostly because people were making fun of the guy. The strange aerial phenomenon known as the perfect being still hasn't disappeared from the sky. Far from it. It's actually gotten a little bigger. It's like it's getting closer, said another resident, dropping down slowly, like it's falling. Some residents have taken it upon themselves to study this steady rate of decline in a scientific manner. If it keeps dropping at its current rate, it'll be down in about a week, says a young girl who looks about as serious as someone working for NASA. It won't drop here, it'll drop the next town over. We'll just have to wait and see if this amateur astrologer is right on the money. When I was done reading, Stephanie was smiling again. What does it mean? I asked, already getting used to relying on her superior intelligence. Nothing much, just that we've got a doctor's appointment, she said. It was around 10 p.m. on Wednesday night and Stephanie and I felt pretty stupid. We had been walking around that particular public park for about an hour and a half when we finally decided to call it quits and move on to the next one. That was how we had spent the last 4 days, and how we were planning on spending the rest of our night, going from public place to public space, until the strange man approached us, until the removal doctor approached us. Why do you want to find him? I asked Stephanie. She just rolled her eyes in response, a common reaction from her. Something that meant something along the lines of, I knew you would ask that, and it confirms how stupid you are. You read the removal doctor's article, right? Remember the last part? The stupid woman who lost her smile thought she saw something on a stretcher, covered with a sheet. She also thought. She heard the doctor mutter about something being almost finished. I interrupted. Stephanie narrowed her eyes. Okay, lesson learned. She doesn't like to be interrupted. She likes being interrupted by someone who steals her thunder even less. Yeah, you're not as stupid as you look. So the perfect being is what he was making, you see. People came to him, idiots I should say, and wanted something about themselves removed. The doctor would take that unwanted quality and then also take something he chose as payment. I think he took the best attributes these people had, the very best, and made the perfect being out of what he chose. He was the kook in the perfect being article. I nodded and then frowned. Why is it in the sky then? Stephanie rolled her eyes again. If I knew that, then we wouldn't be out here walking and sweating like idiots. We've got to find him, tie him to a stretcher, and stop him from making the perfect being. Stop him? Why? Wow, you really are a moron. The hunger is going to become real tonight at midnight. What's next is the perfect being. I think they're all tied together somehow. Everything, even me. Maybe the doctor hasn't finished the being yet. Maybe we can stop it. Remember the last girl in the ledge game article? The one who jumped and tried to take a friend with her. She was pointing at the sky and screaming. What else do we know is going to appear in the sky? She held her hands out to me like I was supposed to give her the last piece of the puzzle. One that she was being generous enough for me to hold. The perfect being, I said. Bingo. We decided to mix it up a little. The article had said that any public space was ripe for a removal doctor appearance. We were also hungry, so that influenced our choice of locale. There was a pair of vending machines in a public parking lot. Fine dining. We lowered our face masks and ate next to them. So, I started, feeling like I should make small talk with this girl. A girl who had existed for less than 24 hours. And who had become real because of a strange, magical newspaper. Your errands, aren't they following us? Nope, Stephanie said. They listen to me. I told them to get rid of Bailey's body and watch the house. They'll probably go run some errands too. Errands? What kind of errands? They gather ingredients for newer versions of me. And no, I don't know what they are or where they get them. They don't do it if I follow them. And they only bring frozen petri dishes and DNA test tubes to the house. For storage. So your parents don't work at the house. Sometimes. It depends. Look, I don't know much about them, alright? They don't want me to. Alright, I said. We don't have to talk about that if you don't want to. I don't want to, she said. Would you like to talk about your dad? About how the MidnightPaper probably killed him? I winced a little. I tried to hide it by taking a sip of my soda, but it was a pathetic attempt. I don't know if... Oh, come on. The mirrors and TV were covered, right? Probably because of an article in the paper about mirrors and TV monsters or some stuff. They probably killed your mother too. That's enough, I said. I get it. I'm thinking about it too. You don't have to be nasty like that. Sorry, fine. You should finish up your Snickers anyway. Why? The doctor's in, Stephanie said, pointing at something across the lot. There, half hidden by what looked like the only tree in miles, was a man wearing black scrubs and a black face mask. Before we could even get up, the removal doctor was already almost in front of us. He moved quickly and quietly, scarily so. It appears that you were both already familiar with my services, the doctor said. He took out a small black business card. On it, printed in white ink, was an address. It looked eerily like the MidnightPaper. His voice was calm, warm, patient. Somehow, I got the impression that it was a therapist's voice. Maybe it had been once. Stephanie swatted the doctor's arm away. I don't need your card because you're taking us to your weird clinic right now. The removal doctor nodded. If you insist. On the outside, the building looked like some sort of abandoned factory. It was made mostly of brick, with several long chimneys that were currently not pumping out smoke. They probably hadn't done that in decades. The windows were smothered with soot, not giving anyone who looked through them the courtesy of looking in, or out. I didn't need to think hard about why. The doctor led us up a ramp and through a massive loading door. It was open, unlocked as if he was expecting guests. We walked through the back door and into what looked like a brand new hospital. The floors were spotless epoxy. The walls were freshly painted white. There were LED strips lining the walls and floors. I looked at Stephanie. She seemed to be analyzing every square inch of the place. Her eyes were cold and distant. I couldn't tell if she was trying to find structural weaknesses or if she was memorizing the place to recreate it later. There were what looked like dozens of beds encased in white tents, each with several LED strips lining the floor around them. Through the white canvas, I could see the shadows of several men and women, each with IV tubes, each with arms, legs, sometimes stumps, and slings hanging over the bed. We followed the removal doctor to the back of the room. It was exactly as the woman in the article had described. A series of examination rooms tailor-made for every medical field. Orthodontist, neurologist, osteology, cardiology. There were even rooms labeled with psychiatry and psychology. The doctor ushered us into his office, which sat exactly at the midpoint where all the doors to all of the examination rooms converged. There was a desk there, charcoal black wood, with a black leather chair and two black leather chairs in front of it for guests and nothing else. Nothing on the walls, nothing on the desk itself. Nothing but his desk and the chairs where we would soon be sitting. The removal doctor set in motion for us to sit. Stephanie beat him to the punch. She practically hopped into the chair. Okay, she said. You've got a nice office, congrats. Now, you're gonna tell us about the perfect being. I could tell that the removal doctor was smiling under his mask. You seem to know a lot about me. Understandable. Understandable? Why? Stephanie asked, leaning so close to the doctor's desk that her chin was practically touching the wood. Because you've been my patient. A few versions of you, in fact. Stephanie's eyes widened. Her mouth opened and then shut and then opened again. She was speechless, and so was I. Wait, I said. In what way? Did you make Stephanie too? The doctor chuckled. No, she's not my creation. She's not perfect, contrary to what she or her parents might think. You know my parents. Do they work for you? Did they? Stephanie began, but the doctor held up a hand. No, I don't know them, nor have I worked with them, but I am familiar with their work. Pointless, limited, lots of wasted potential. Though, I suppose I should thank them. After all, without them, I would have never finished my creation. Stephanie charged at the doctor, vaulting over the desk and grabbing him by the collar of his black scrubs. Talk, now, from the beginning, she said. All right, I don't mind telling you. There's no need for you to demand anything. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, good places to find good materials. I met you there. There were many versions of you who took me up on my offer. Some of them wanted to be a little less like you. A little less like what your parents decided was perfect. I was too happy to oblige. I took what made them special, and I added it to my creation. Bit by bit, So you see, I know you. I know you better than even your parents do. Stephanie had heard enough. She slammed her fist into the doctor's jaw. He didn't even wince. Didn't even recoil in the slightest. Where's the thing you made now? It's done. It's not like anyone, not even like you. When I put the final piece in place, it took flight. Beautiful to witness. It'll be back soon. You'll see it and you'll thank me. Stephanie collapsed back into her chair. I had never seen her look so defeated. Like she wasn't smart enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough. For the first time in her life. Do you know about the MidnightPaper? I asked. The doctor shrugged. Never heard of it. Okay, you're coming with us, Stephanie said. I'm keeping my eye on you until this is all over. The doctor nodded. My work is done here anyway. It was after midnight by the time we were on our way back to the motel. Stephanie was quiet the rest of the way, as was the doctor. It was weird seeing both of them staring out through the windows of my car, like two fictional beings come to life, and judging the world around them for the first time. When we arrived, we found what I already knew was going to be there. There, on the filthy rug in front of our room, was a bundle of black pages. Ah, the doctor said. The MidnightPaper. Stephanie and I locked the doctor in our motel room and sat underneath one of the hall lights. She had an eager, almost scared look on her face as she waited for me to unroll the paper and begin reading it aloud. I was beyond not reading it. It was too late now anyway. I soon came to regret that idea. I began reading it to Stephanie. End times. Conditions in upstate New York worsen. It's now a little after midnight, but the sky is far from dark. It appears that the locals were right. The sky is broken. There are streaks of white light in the sky, running as far and wide as the eye can see. They look like cracks, said one resident. Like cracks in the sky itself, and something's coming through. We can't help but agree. It seems like a nightmare, but it isn't. And one question keeps running through the minds of everyone who's witnessing something that should be impossible. How did we get here? The answer lies in the story we printed just last Friday. Back then it seemed almost cute. A piece about a strange aerial phenomenon in a small town in upstate New York. How wrong we were. The object labeled as the perfect being appeared to be a man-shaped thing floating in the sky. It roughly resembled Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, with what appeared to be regular human arms and legs making an X shape. Since that Friday, it descended slowly, falling to Earth at a steady pace, not picking up speed as it should have. The closer it got, the more people started to realize that it wasn't something as innocuous as a person-shaped balloon or kite or drone. It wasn't a prank. Something was very, very wrong. While its exact measurements are unknown, the thing in the sky appeared to be about 15 feet in length from its head to its toes, and it did indeed have toes and fingers, and a face. That much could easily be seen with binoculars or a telescope. It appeared, however, that the longer you looked, the more it damaged your eyes. It has a strange light, said a local man who describes himself as an astronomy hobbyist. I looked at it for around half an hour, and it blinded me in my right eye, burned right through my cornea. At least that's what the doctor said. No footage of any kind showing the being has been captured. It appears that strange light has the same effect on electronic lenses as it does on human corneas. It broke our freaking camera, said a field reporter from the local news station. Any type of camera was affected in a similar way, with lenses breaking and the inner workings of electronic devices pointed at it short-circuiting. The closer the thing in the sky got to the ground, the more it started to affect people in other ways too, Residents of the small town of Redacted fell to their knees upon seeing the creature, person, up close. It wasn't uncommon in those early afternoon hours to hear people praying, to see people praising the strange phenomenon as some sort of divine being. And then it dipped beyond a hill in the horizon, toward another town, one that was currently under law enforcement lockdown. Ammonia leak, said a man stationed at one of the many roadblocks surrounding the town. Built up in the sewage system, the pipes underneath the whole town exploded and hurt residents. Can't say more. Cleanup is ongoing. Clear the way. As more and more onlookers from the neighboring towns attempted to breach the roadblocks and military checkpoints, the personnel stationed there were forced to use tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowds. "They're barbarians," said a woman who was hit in the leg with a rubber bullet, fracturing her shin. "They just opened fire without warning. There were gunshots on the other side of the barrier too. A lot of us heard screams and moans too, over there in Redacted. I don't buy the ammonia thing. I worry about the residents." After a little research, we were able to confirm that the town that is blocked off by what appears to be the military is the same town that was written about in a previous article. A town that was afflicted by a strange case of contagious, insatiable hunger. It seemed that this would be the end of the story, that the military personnel would never let us catch a glimpse of the being descending upon the town afflicted with hunger. But that wasn't the case. A group of riled-up onlookers decided to destroy the barricade by ramming it with their cars. It worked. Even under the hail of real bullets, the cars served as unstoppable battering rams, cleaving through metal and wood and sandbags, and creating several openings large enough for people to crawl through. And we were right behind them. It appeared that the deeper we got into the town of Redacted, the military personnel stopped following us, like they were really afraid of catching something. Suddenly, our face masks seemed woefully inadequate to deal with whatever was really going on in the town. It was disturbing beyond belief. There were splotches of blood and bodily fluids here and there on the asphalt, extended at least 10 feet in diameter in all directions. There must have been hundreds of these blotches. We soon realized that they signified the places where people had collapsed and had been subsequently torn apart. We discovered the culprits soon enough. Men, women, even children, literally bursting out of their clothes. Their stomachs were swollen and distended to the point that their very skin was bruised and bleeding, as if ripping under the pressure of whatever they had consumed. Their faces were the worst part. Their mouths were open wide and constantly expelling a steady stream of drool, like broken faucets. Their teeth were chipped and fractured, the spaces in between them so crammed with what looked like strips of jerky and fragments of bone that they were literally cracking under the pressure. It wasn't long before these people began attacking the new arrivals. They got them on the ground. We would rather not describe the rest. A few people managed to get away and hide in the houses. It was there that we witnessed what happened next. The being in the sky descended upon the town. It was massive, 15, maybe 20 feet tall. It had no genitals, and it was impossible to discern its gender from the shape of the body or the features in the face. The face was beautiful, angelic, like something Michelangelo would have painted, masterfully crafted. Weeping and falling to one's knees seemed to be a common reaction to looking upon it. Even the bloated people fell to their knees, only looking up when the being's feet touched the asphalt. And then it smiled, a loving, welcoming, forgiving smile, and the people charged it. They ripped at it with their bloody fingers, chewed with their broken teeth, hundreds and hundreds of them, spilling out of the houses like rabid rats, crawling over each other and pulling and pushing and biting so they could get a piece of the golden, shining, blinding flesh of the being. And then, all at once, the air began to ripple, to crackle, as if under some strange electricity. We saw cars begin to lift up into the sky. We saw leaves turning brown and then green and then falling and then growing once more. The grass seemed to be in a constant state of flux, growing and withering in the blink of an eye, moving as constantly as the waves of the ocean. And then the first crack appeared in the sky, a blinding white line that seemed to signify the shattering of reality itself. Now, a little after midnight, things have gotten worse. There's nothing left of the being, and the people who consumed it have started to change. Some have aged rapidly in seconds, their hair growing into manes that trailed behind them like bridal veils, and then they broke down, withered away, and were reborn from their own ashes. First as fetuses and then as babies, then as children, and finally as adults once more. Some people simply blinked out of existence, leaving a crack of white light in the air. It didn't take long before things started to break down. Houses crumbled and collapsed into themselves, as if being sucked into miniature black holes. Reality itself was breaking down. People were right. There's something coming through on the other side. Something is pulsing and beginning to spill out of the white light of the cracks in the sky. Something big. Crap. Stephanie and I shared a look of disbelief. It was Thursday at noon. Stephanie, the removal doctor, and I sat at the booth of a fast food restaurant. It was like a bad joke. The duplicated girl, the mad doctor, and the lunatic reading magical newspapers. I was wearing sunglasses. The fluorescent lights in the building were making my migraine spike unbearably. Stephanie and I had ordered, but the removal doctor hadn't. As a matter of fact, in the time that we had been together, I hadn't seen him eat anything or ask for any food. "Aren't you gonna eat something?" I asked. "My treat." He shook his head. "No need. Removed it." For some reason, hearing him say that made me less hungry. I didn't want to ask him about why he hadn't asked to drink any water, or why he hadn't used the bathroom during our pit stop either. "So, do you have any idea why your creation allowed itself to be eaten like that?" Stephanie asked. There was that impatience in her voice again. It was like she needed answers, but the world was too slow to give them to her when she wanted them the most. The world was always catching up to her in every way. It took the removal doctor a while to answer. It seemed that he was thinking about Stephanie's question thoroughly. Finally, he shook his head. "It must have wanted that to happen." "Why? You said it was perfect, right? That's the only thing a perfect being does. Want to die?" "Your parents tried to make you perfect," the doctor said. "And many versions of you wanted to die too." Stephanie was gritting her teeth. I could almost hear them cracking from where I was sitting. I decided to jump in and change the subject. "If we find the town with the hunger, could you remove it from everyone there?" I asked. The doctor nodded. "If someone afflicted with it volunteered." "Volunteered?" Stephanie asked. "You can't just take it? Like you take whatever you want." "It's a delicate process," the doctor said. "Someone volunteering one of their attributes for me to take is part of how it works." "Do you know why the events in the article happened? It was as if eating the bean broke reality or something." "I believe that this hunger is a special quality like what I have. I can take a quality and hold it, and then put it into something else. I think they can eat so purely, so completely, that they can consume a set of qualities and take it into themselves. In essence, they become what they eat. I only made one version of my creation for the reason. More than one might cause things to get noticed. So, all we have to do is stop them from eating the perfect being, somehow," I said. Somehow, just talking about this had made my headache double in intensity. "Well, we have to find the right town first," Stephanie said. I nodded. "It's been 12 hours since the hunger became real. We don't have much time before things go wrong." "But we won't know what town the perfect being will appear over until tomorrow at midnight," Stephanie said. I frowned. I guess we should pick a town, find a motel there, and wait till tomorrow. Our method of choosing a town turned out to be pretty simple. There is a stand filled with maps at the entrance of the restaurant. Stephanie picked one, opened it, and stabbed her finger down over the first town that she saw. I'm driving, she declared suddenly. Do you even... I began stammering, but she cut me off. If you were about to ask if I knew how to drive, duh. If you were about to ask if I have a driver's license, nope. But look at you, you're pale, you're wearing sunglasses and flinching at the littlest of light. I gave in, she was right. My migraine seemed to be getting worse with every passing hour. I was looking forward to lying back in the passenger seat with my eyes closed. We climbed into my crappy car with Stephanie in the driver's seat and off we went. So, I asked, my eyes closed, are you even a real doctor? The removal doctor didn't respond. I could tell he didn't do jokes. Could you remove my migraines? I asked, half serious. Yes, the removal doctor said. I don't know if that's a good idea, Stephanie said, cutting in. Yeah, I know. It's tempting though, I said. We settled into a roadside motel by nightfall. Stephanie and I decided the night before that we wouldn't leave the doctor alone. So we took turns going to the bathroom or leaving to get food, while the other person sat with him. Being alone with him was unnerving. I couldn't stand the way that he looked at me, the way he looked at everything, like he was studying it, measuring it, evaluating how valuable it was. I was relieved when Stephanie returned with dinner. More fast food. God, I was gonna gain 20 pounds by the time this was all over. Why chemistry? I asked Stephanie, taking a bite of a taco. I want to double major in bio and chem. I don't know if the others did the same, but judging how we're all freaking alike, I bet they did. As for why, it's stupid. But my parents used it to make me and my sisters right. I guess I figured I could understand myself better if I studied it too. It's weird. I always remember being into science, even as a little girl, asking for chemistry sets and books on Marie Curie. But I know that's all BS. I wasn't little, ever. I just woke up like this one day, with my errands in an empty house. I shuddered. It was unforgivable, what this girl went through. I'm sorry. I can't imagine what that must have been like, I said. Stephanie shrugged. Whatever. At least I didn't have to spend time with the people who made me, just their dumbed-down clones. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that town, maybe close by, maybe further away. A town where people had been hungry for 24 hours. A town where food would soon no longer be enough. The next day was pretty much the same. Stephanie and I made small talk and drank a lot of coffee. Neither of us seemed very hungry. I didn't have to think hard about why. By midnight, Stephanie and I were standing in the room, watching the door intently. The removal doctor sat on the bed behind us, scrutinizing everything around him like always. 3 knocks rapped against the door. I waited a few seconds and then opened it. There in front of the door was the same black bundle as always. I began. Just do it already, Stephanie said. I want to see what it says. I nodded and untied the twine. The paper unfurled itself and I immediately wanted to throw up. This was the only article on the front page. Where is everybody? I swear it repeated that phrase at least 50 times. I tossed the paper into a plastic bag and tossed that into our room's trash can. Well, that's not helpful at all, Stephanie said. It's my fault, Stephanie. I shouldn't have read any of them like my dad said. It's my fault it all came true. What if the papers predict the future? Then reading them or not doesn't make a difference. Your dad could have warned you about not getting involved. That made me feel a little bit better. And then I remembered something and I ran outside. We were on the second floor. Our room looked out into a hallway with a balcony. I was glad it did, because there, hanging in the sky, was what looked like a star, except that it was brighter than any star I had ever seen. "Well, hello, perfect being," Stephanie said. "It's above the next town over," I said, pulling out my phone. I opened up a map application and scrolled a bit. There it was. The name of the town with the hunger. "Got you now." "Yeah, but we're missing the most important part. How are we going to stop the town from eating that thing?" Stephanie said. "We'll think of something," I said. I hadn't even noticed that the removal doctor was standing next to me. He was looking up at the sky, his eyes wide, his mouth a grin. Yeah, Stephanie said, pushing past him. "Enjoy the view while it lasts, Doc. That thing's getting torn apart in a few days." Somehow, the doctor's smile got wider at that. Saturday morning, Stephanie, the removal doctor, and I sat at a small diner. Not seeing the doctor eat or drink anything for this long was seriously freaking me out. I tried not to think about it. "Be right back," I said. "I'm going to the bathroom. Watch him." Stephanie nodded. As soon as I stepped out of the bathroom, I was met with an explosive ruckus. Several people were standing out in the middle of the street. They were pointing at the sky. There was a single news van and its crew among them, exactly like the article. I made my way back to our booth, only to see Stephanie sitting alone. "Where is he?" I asked. She turned around, only to see the seat next to her was empty. I tossed all of the money in my wallet on her table and bolted for the door. Stephanie and I ran out of the diner and toward the growing crowd. Cell phones were out and pointed at the sky. I knew that, according to the article, their pictures wouldn't show much, but it was still unnerving to see people acting exactly as the MidnightPaper had described. Stephanie called out to me and then sprinted towards the news van. I already knew what she had seen. There, among a few people talking to a reporter, was the removal doctor. I got there just in time to hear him speak. "I created it," he said. "It's the perfect being." Those in the crowd who had caught what he had said broke out in fits of laughter. I didn't blame them. "Come on," I said, grabbing the doctor's arm and pulling him out of the crowd. "Real cute," Stephanie said, "talking to the press, just like the article said." The doctor didn't say anything. Stephanie drove out of town while I massaged my forehead. The sprint towards the crowd had made my migraine even worse. It was like a living thing, pulsating and growing and snaking behind my eyes, thrusting deep spikes of white-hot agony into my helpless brain. I was nauseous too, but I was probably just carsick. "You look horrible," Stephanie said. "Thanks. You want another aspirin?" I shook my head. "I took 4 this morning." Stephanie whistled. "That's not good, is it, Doc?" The doctor didn't say anything. I was starting to suspect that he never went to med school. Stephanie turned a corner and that's when we saw it. A roadblock, exactly like the article I described. There were sandbags, about half a dozen men and women in military fatigues, and a few unmarked pickup trucks. "Hey," Stephanie said, "isn't this happening too soon? I don't remember the roadblock being mentioned right away." "The perfect being's real, right?" I said, working my fingers into my temples to try and stave off the pain. "The timelines are different. The doc became real like a week ago, but he had already finished the perfect being. He didn't have to get all the parts over a few months as the article said. I think that the timeline has to match when the papers are delivered to make the things in them come true." "Well, we're not getting through today. Those guys look like they mean business," Stephanie said. "Wait, the last article got delivered on Wednesday at midnight, right? In it, the perfect being descended in the afternoon, and that's when it got eaten." "So Thursday afternoon," I said. "Great," Stephanie said. "I guess we know when reality gets flushed down the toilet." It was Wednesday at 10 p.m. The sky above me was dark and overcast. but not cloudy enough to hide the bright spot I knew was the perfect being. Over the last couple of days, Stephanie, the removal doctor, and I have been watching it, tracking its slow descent almost obsessively. It was like a meteor falling in slow motion. It would be just as destructive. The wind was picking up, swatting at my face with what felt like invisible hands. I didn't mind. The cold felt nice against my aching forehead. I took one step forward, the concrete crunching beneath my shoes, and reached the edge. The cold, dark asphalt of the street below was like a second night sky. Tiny chunks embedded in the tar twinkling like stars. I lifted one foot over the edge, and it began. A barrage of visual information exploded through my brain. This wasn't like a dream, wasn't like picturing something in your mind. This was different. The pictures were clearer than any dream I'd ever had, as clear as reality itself. And they had a strange weight to them, like what I was seeing was true somehow, like it was a fact etched into the very nature of the universe. I saw a row of houses, windows broken, blood splatter on the driveway, one of them spitting fire in pillars of smoke. I saw a group of people, wild-eyed, mouths open wide, teeth bloody and lips mangled and ripped. I saw a blinding light, a light with arms and legs, and... What are you doing? I opened my eyes. I hadn't even realized I had closed them. I turned around to see Stephanie walk out of the door to the stairwell. We were standing on the rooftop of the crappy motel we had been staying at. "Did you leave me with that psycho to come up here and do this?" Stephanie asked. "Where?" I began. And then Stephanie opened the door wider, and the removal doctor walked out and onto the concrete roof. "This is stupid, seriously stupid. You don't know how the ledge game affects people. You don't know if playing it causes the visions to come true," Stephanie said. "Well, they're going to come true anyway, aren't they? You both have, and I read about you in the paper." "Nice. Thanks for lumping me in with this guy," Stephanie said. The doc walked over to the roof's edge. I was worried that he might try the ledge game out for himself, but instead, he just stared at the light in the sky. His creation. His perfect being. "Can you talk to it?" I asked him. The doctor shrugged. "I haven't tried. It should be able to hear and understand speech. It has all the right organs and all the right places. I implanted the ability to speak up to 10 languages. I guess it's up to it if it wants to use those gifts, or any of the ones I've given it." "Well," I said, turning to Stephanie, "there you go. We might be able to talk to the thing, explain what's going to happen if it lands." "Yeah," Stephanie said, shrugging herself. "But if that's its plan, talking to it won't make a difference." "I guess we'll have to wait and see," I said. Suddenly a cough forced its way out of my throat. "You okay?" Stephanie asked. "Yeah, I must be coming down with something." "Well, let's wait in the room, okay? The new paper is due soon." 2 hours later, I was sitting on my bed in the motel, a wet towel over my eyes. The migraine had gotten worse once again. The pain was like a mountain range. Just when I thought I had hit a valley and it would subside, another peak would rear its jagged head and spear me right in the brain. It seemed that one of my hands was always clasped against my temple, massaging it. I was starting to get nauseous too, to the point that I hadn't eaten anything since noon. "We need to go to an urgent care or something," Stephanie said. "I can't believe I'm saying that with a doctor in the room." "Well, he's not exactly a normal doctor, is he?" I said, massaging my forehead again. "Besides, if I get into a car now, I'm going to puke. Just let me rest for a bit. It'll get better, it always does." "Okay," Stephanie said. "And we're just gonna pretend that this has nothing to do with the paper, right?" I shrugged. "I don't know what we can do about it now anyway. We have to stop the perfect being, and that's more important than any migraine, no matter how bad it is." Yeah, You're not reading the next one, that's for sure. But don't think it's coming, I said, covering my eyes with the towel again. What do you mean? It's almost 12:15. The paper's never been late before. I heard Stephanie open the motel room door and then shut it. You're right, she said finally. There's nothing out there. That can't be good, right? I asked. No, I guess there has to be a reality for the paper to predict. Without it, there's no reason to deliver it. We turned out the lights shortly after that. The next morning, when we opened the door, there was no paper either. For some reason, not seeing one there made me feel uneasy. I had grown accustomed to it, looking forward to it, migraines and horrible events and all. Now that it was gone, the world felt a little less exciting, a little more mundane. But I knew that was stupid. That afternoon was the end of the world, and that was about as exciting as it got. Exciting in a bad way. The crowd started to form at around 9 a.m. People from all walks of life were abandoning small businesses. Some were even leaving their cars abandoned by the side of the road and gathering in droves in the middle of the street. There was nobody to disperse them because the cops were joining in too. Every face, every phone, every pair of eyes was turned up at the sky. I already knew what they were looking at, but I had to see it for myself anyway. There, in the sky, was what looked like a star that was bright enough to shine in the daytime, but I knew better. By noon, the being had gotten so close that it looked like a second sun, a bigger sun, a sun the shape of a person. Through my sunglasses, I could make out a head and its arms and legs. I had seen it before, had been seeing it for the past few days, but that didn't stop it from sending chills down my spine. It was floating, no, dropping slowly without a care in the world. It was like a deep-sea diver slowly drifting through the depths, propelled downward by its own weight and the invisible pull of the earth. It seemed like the whole town was in the street now. The buildings around us looking deserted, the windows dark, the doors often wide open. It didn't make a difference. There was nobody taking advantage of the distraction to hop behind shop counters and open registers, or break windows and carry out merchandise. All eyes were glued on the sky. By 1 p.m., the thing was close enough to see clearly without squinting. It was huge. It had to be around 20 feet in length. Sure, I had known in the back of my mind that it had to be that big, not just because of what the article had said. For something to be clearly seen, at the altitude this thing appeared at, it must be massive. And yet it seemed to retain some sort of elegance. It wasn't a bulky, unwieldy hulk of a thing. It didn't flail as it fell or roll up in a ball in anticipation of the collision. It was holding a pose, head tilted toward the sky, feet pointing down in what could have been a ballet stance. Its arms were held above its head in a V shape. It looked angelic, important, meaningful, but it also looked wrong. This wasn't supposed to be there. I averted my gaze. It was too bright. Looking at it made my migraine feel 10 times worse. The wailing started not long after that. It was a sort of hum, like an involuntary sound that spread throughout the crowd. It was as if people had been trying to hold in their cries, but once the thing got closer, it was impossible. People were bawling, collapsing to their knees. I saw people making the sign of the cross. I saw people holding hands in prayer. I saw people lifting their hands up to the sky in adoration. Very few people were wearing their face masks. Maybe some of them thought that this was an angel, something coming down to heal the world, to eradicate this modern plague and make it all right. It would eradicate the plague all right. The problem was that it would take everything else with it too. "This is freaking wild," Stephanie said. Immediately, a man shot an angry look in her direction, like what she had said was blasphemy, like you couldn't curse in the vicinity of something that looked so holy. This was bad. and it was about to get a whole lot worse. By 2 p.m., the being was so low in the sky that it started to become obvious where its trajectory was heading, and it wasn't here. A soft little gasp made its way throughout the crowd. People had been so caught up in admiring the being that they hadn't thought of where it would land. But now that they were seeing that it wasn't going to land there, they were indignant. Dozens of people rushed to their cars, pushing past each other with absolutely no regard for each other's safety. It was as if people forgot that other human beings were made of flesh and blood. Elbows flew into faces, hands connected with faces and drew blood. Everyone and everything was an obstacle, and there was only one finish line. The next town over. This was exactly like the article. Stephanie, the doctor, and I all piled into my car. Just as I was starting the engine, there was a boom. Something connected with the driver's side door. I was slammed to one side, my neck catching the seatbelt as my body tried to launch itself across the car's cabin. My headache screamed in response. I turned to look at Stephanie. She was in a similar state of pained anger. She was rubbing her neck in the places in her torso where the seatbelt had held her in place. "What the heck was that?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I don't know," I said, my head pounding. My brain seemed to be a growing, angry thing, one that was beating away at the insides of my skull in retaliation. I coughed again, this time so hard that it spread burning agony through my chest. It felt as if my lungs were falling apart. I turned to look at the removal doctor. He hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. He was slumped over in one side of the car, but his eyes were wide open. I saw him stretch, heard his joints pop, and then he simply scooted over and resumed his place in the back seat. He didn't look hurt in the slightest. "Are you okay, Doc?" I asked. He nodded. "No permanent damage on both of you that I can see. I can remove the pain anyway." "No thanks," I said. Finally, the safety of everyone in the car confirmed. I turned to look out of my window. The glass was a spiderweb of blurs and distorted shapes. Whatever had hit us, it had dented the driver's side door beyond recognition and popped the window inward. Miraculously, the glass hadn't shattered, it just moved. I could still see some shards lining the side of my seat, like overgrown pieces of hail. And then the door creaked, shuddered, and began moving back. I heard the shriek of tires and the pop of metal on metal as whatever had hit us moved in reverse and struck a lamppost. It still didn't stop, peeling out with a squeal that made me shut my eyes in agony. And then it was gone. It was a police cruiser. Its occupants were more concerned with getting to the other town than with the state of the people in my car. I would have shaken my head, but I don't think it would have been able to handle the pain. I put my car into drive, tried in vain to check both side mirrors, and drove off. My migraine spiked yet again as my car turned out of town. The road seemed to blur and distort with every throb of my head. The world was a wobbly, unstable, too bright mess of shapes and painful, sharp sounds. Traffic, sirens. A few cars wrapped around streetlights or each other. It was chaos. Soon, I could see why. The military roadblock was ahead of us, hidden by the crowd. The cars in front of us were empty, their windows open, their occupants piled into a writhing, pushing, screaming mass that converged down the roadblock. "We're getting out," I said. Stephanie nodded. Almost immediately after getting out of the car, we were assaulted by the shrieking voices of the mob. They were demanding entry into the town, claiming that the roadblock was some sort of ploy to keep them away from the being, if they only knew. I scanned the angry faces, not finding anyone out of the ordinary. "What are you looking for?" Stephanie shouted. A mass of bodies pulled and pushed, taking us to the roadblock, whether we wanted it or not. The article made it seem like there was a reporter, right? Someone who had witnessed the events in town and then wrote about them in their point of view. But there's no one that looks strange. There hasn't been anyone like that at any of the events that have come true. You're right. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe they look like a normal person, she said, glancing at the sea of bodies that churned and bobbed ever closer to the military personnel. Someone slammed a shoulder into my back, almost toppling me over. Stephanie grabbed my arm and pulled me up, with one hand. Her article had been right. She was stronger than she looked. I turned around to grab the removal doctor's collar. "What are you doing?" Stephanie asked. "We can't get separated, and we shouldn't be standing here." "Holy crap," Stephanie said, her eyes wide. She remembered the article too. Stephanie took control. She pulled me and the removal doctor as she moved. With one hand held out in front of her, and the other wrapped tightly around my waist, she began working us toward the side of the road. "Move out of my way!" I heard her yell as she thrusted her free hand into a man's chest. The man crumpled like she had tackled him instead. I had to focus on keeping my feet grounded, otherwise Stephanie's strength would have dragged me off my feet. I pulled the doc along, my fingers aching with the effort. It took her almost half an hour, but Stephanie broke through the crowd and pulled both me and the doctor onto the sidewalk. I massaged my wrist. She was so strong that her fingers had left bruises on my skin. I didn't mind. The new pain took the focus off of my migraine. "Jesus Christ," I said, looking at the crowd. It seemed to have doubled in size. They seemed to have gotten angrier too. The people at the head of the beast, made of hundreds of bodies, were shouting at the men and women in fatigues. The fact that the people behind the roadblock were armed seemed to make no difference at all. One of the women in uniform tightened her hands around her rifle. The men and the women next to her did the same. There was a shared tension, one that was getting worse by the second. It was as if they were all part of one big, complex muscle, one that was struggling against a massive weight, one that was just about to snap under the pressure. And then there was a bang. I didn't see where it happened, but one of the people in uniform pulled the trigger. A gasp erupted through the crowd. It was a tiny, gentle thing, like a whimper. It didn't stay tiny or gentle for long, though. Soon, there was shouting, indignation spreading like a virus. People were getting bolder, moving closer, hands pulling up into fists, fists pulling back. And then 3 more bangs. I saw the rifles this time. It would have been hard not to. Almost all of them had fired. The people who were hit got up in seconds. There was no blood, only limbs that flopped weirdly, bending at angles they were not supposed to. Rubber bullets. A few pops exploded across the crowd. White smoke ballooned in seconds, swallowing clusters of people whole, seemingly erasing them from existence. All that was left behind was their gagging and their coughs. Tear gas. It had just occurred to me that the uniformed men and women were wearing gas masks. I saw one man run towards his car, throw open the driver's side door and hop in. Several other people followed his lead. I looked away. I knew what was coming next. Tires shrieked, engines roared, and bodies smacked against metal. The screams were the worst. There was surprise in them, and hurt, that too. The first car was hit by a barrage of bullets, real ones, but it didn't matter. It slammed against the roadblock anyway. Another car followed its lead, and then another. "Let's go," Stephanie said, grabbing my arm again. I grabbed the doctor's arm in response. Stephanie pulled us through the crowd again. It was easier that time, because there were fewer people pushing and pulling, but it was harder too, because of the blood and the limbs poking out next to us like broken branches. Stephanie pulled us through one of the holes in the roadblock. Next to us, one of the cars that had made it was turned over. The engine hissed and popped like some strange mechanical insect. We kept moving. The world was too bright now, far too loud, far too busy. My head pounded. White-hot claws of agony were sinking into my brain incessantly now. The black tendrils of sleep were digging into my vision. I don't know when we got to the town, but once we did, it was impossible not to notice the eerie silence. After all the shouting, it was as if the world had fallen away, like someone had turned the volume all the way down. I opened my eyes and immediately wished I hadn't. The asphalt of the streets around us was covered in brown splotches. Those same splotches had been tracked up on walls, on the sidewalks, on broken windows and busted-in doors. They were the rusty color of dried blood. "You need to stay awake," Stephanie shouted, pointing to the sky. I looked up. There was a second sun in the sky, and now it was much, much closer. A group of people were gathering below it. They were bloated, bloody, filled with about 1,000,000 cuts and black bruises. The articles had been right. Their faces were the worst part. I turned to the removal doctor. "That's your creation, right?" I asked. "Tell it to stop. Tell it to go back or go away, or whatever. Tell it to get as far away from those people as it can." The doctor wasn't even looking at me. He was staring at the perfect being, a dazed smile on his face. I grabbed him by the collar and shook him violently. "Listen, you know what's about to happen, right? So stop it. Help us stop it." I broke out into a series of coughs. By the time that I got my breathing back under control, I saw the removal doctor finally turn to look at me. "I can't," he said quietly. "What?" Stephanie shouted. "Why not?" "It does what it wants," the doctor said. "Don't you understand? It's better than me, better than all of us. It doesn't have to listen to what I say, even if I'm the one who made it." "Oh, you're useless," Stephanie shouted. "I can't believe we dragged you around for this." "What do we do now?" I asked her. The migraine was making it hard to think. I just wanted it all to go away. Wanted the world to turn off and go away, and leave me alone. "I know what I'm doing," Stephanie said. She walked into the middle of the street. There, next to a discarded, bloody uniform, was a rifle. Stephanie picked it up, turning it around in her hands as if studying every bolt, every groove, memorizing it. "Do you even know how to use that?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. She lifted it, ejected the magazine, studied it, and slammed it back in, and aimed at the house across the street. She pulled the trigger. Bang. My migraine spiked in response. I shut my eyes tightly and waited for the pain to subside, only to see her aiming at the house again. The first shot had missed it entirely. She took a deep breath, readjusted the rifle on her shoulder, and pulled the trigger once more. I shut my eyes. When I opened them, I could see that there was a hole in the home's front door. Stephanie repositioned the rifle and took aim again, this time at a wind chime swaying gently in the breeze. I massaged my forehead, looking up to see that the wind chime was spinning wildly. Stephanie had fired once more. Now the wind chime was on the ground. Above it, twirling with the wind, was the piece of string that had held it in place. She had cut it with the bullet. There was that strange intelligence that Bailey had talked about. In less than a minute, she had learned how to fire the rifle and had perfected her aim. I didn't have to think hard about where she was going to aim next. Sure enough, Stephanie turned the rifle toward the sky, toward the shining figure that was still dropping slowly. Bang. The thing in the sky didn't even flinch, but I could see that Stephanie had hit it. A trickle of light seemed to be rolling off one of its legs. A drop of pure white slammed down onto the asphalt in front of us. The air shimmered around it, and colors appearing and spreading, as if someone had spilled motor oil over the air itself, and the very surface of the ground around it was covered in broken rainbows. Stephanie," I said, but she was already aiming the rifle. Bang. This time, I saw the bullet hit the beam's midsection. Most of the white blood spilled out and onto the street below, but so did something else. A shining, golden white chunk of flesh smacked against the sidewalk. Instantly, The air began to shimmer and distort, exploding into a kaleidoscope of rainbows and geometric shapes. "You're not helping," I shouted. "Crap," Stephanie shouted, lowering her rifle. A few of the hungry people were walking toward the rainbow spill where the being's flesh had landed. They weren't shambling like corpses or crawling like monsters. They were walking normally, almost casually. Stephanie raised her rifle. I looked away. A series of bangs filled the air. When I looked back, the people that had started walking toward the being's flesh lay crumpled in the street. I felt hot bile burning its way up my throat. "Are you all right?" Stephanie asked. I shook my head and dropped to my knees. I could feel vomit forcing its way up my body. Cold sweat broke out across my face. I shivered. It was as if the air around me was suddenly much colder. I gagged, opening my mouth and getting ready to vomit whatever it was that was making me sick. But nothing came out. I just coughed again. It sounded worse and felt worse too. "Wait a minute," Stephanie said. "Look at me." I turned to look at her and she was already crouching next to me. "Turn your head up," she said, pushing my chin up and tilted my head back. "Jesus Christ, how have you not noticed this before?" "What?" I asked. There's something coming out of your nose when you breathe." "What do you mean?" I asked, and then I felt it again, like hot bile in my chest, like the very air in my lungs was burning up and forcing its way out. I coughed again, this time, spitting something out through my mouth. "Holy crap," Stephanie shouted. "Look." I turned to look at what she was pointing at. There on the ground where I had spat out was a black something. It looked like tar, like an oily substance. I wiped my lips with the back of my hand, and some of it tracked on my skin. I held it up to the light and noticed that it wasn't entirely black. Not really, it was spit. Spit that held thousands of tiny black particles. Particles that were starting to break away and float up into the air, like tiny black embers. Like pieces of something that was breaking up into smoke. That was when I realized what it was. It was the MidnightPaper. Pieces of the MidnightPaper. It was the black smoke that had been coming up from the pages. "Oh," I said. "Yeah, oh," Stephanie said. "Reading them must have done that to you somehow, breathing in the fumes they expel." "My migraines," I said. "Started right after reading the papers, right after breathing that stuff in." "Jesus, what if that's what's causing all this?" Stephanie asked. "What if the perfect being is real, and the doctor, and me, all because that crap's in you?" "I don't know," I said. I turned to the doctor, who was too busy looking at the being. Crap, it was so much lower in the sky now, about 2 stories from the ground. We had to do something, and fast. "Can you remove this from me?" I asked, showing the stuff on my hand to the doctor. He turned and looked at it, disinterested. "If I do, I'm going to take something else." "What?" Stephanie asked. "Isn't that thing complete?" "I don't plan on adding it to my creation," the doctor said. "Yeah, where are you gonna put it then? Up your—" "Stephanie," I said. "If it stops that thing, what does it matter?" Stephanie didn't seem convinced, and then she looked up. The thing was so close now that it lit up her face with golden light. "Fine." "Really?" I asked. "If that thing goes, you'll be gone too, and the doctor." She shrugged. "Better to go this way and save the world than die at Bailey's hands." "I'm sorry," I said. She shrugged. "It's not like I was ever real to begin with, right? Not in the article, not here." "That's not true," I said. "You are real." "Okay, now don't make me change my mind. Let's get to it then. Doc, what do you need?" Stephanie asked. The doctor produced a black medical bag from somewhere. We moved into one of the houses. Stephanie and the removal doctor cleared the dining room table. I took off my shirt and then hesitated. Do I need to take off anything else? The doctor shook his head. Just the shirt is fine. Stephanie looked out the window. What are you gonna take? I asked. Oh, something you won't miss, he said. Hurry up, Stephanie said. That thing's almost at street level. Okay, I said, lying down on the table. Thanks, Stephanie, for everything. Stephanie walked over to the table and patted me on the shoulder. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna be watching this guy. Wouldn't want him to take something too important, right? The doctor zipped open his bag. He pulled out something I could barely recognize. It looked like a metal bug of some kind with legs, a tail, even a cluster of black eyes along its metal face. The doctor pulled my mouth open and began wrapping the thing's legs around my head. It was almost impossibly cold. He then inserted the thing's tail into my mouth. I heard it hissing, releasing some kind of gas. Breathe naturally, he said. I took an uneasy breath. Immediately, I began to feel reality slipping away. The room darkened. My eyes grew heavy. The last thing I saw, just as I closed my eyes, was the living room window filling with golden light. I woke up what felt like an eternity later. I was staring at a white ceiling. I was lying on something soft. I got up slowly. What struck me first was that the migraine was gone. Finally gone. I had gotten used to living with it for so long that its absence was shocking. And then I realized where I was. I was in my room at my parents' house. I was shirtless, just as I had been in that town, and I was wearing the same pair of pants and the same pair of shoes. I rushed downstairs, practically spilling out the front door. There in the driveway was my car. There wasn't a single scratch, a single dent on the driver's side door, or anywhere else for that matter. It was nighttime. How many hours had passed? How had I gotten back here? Why was my car fixed all of a sudden? When I got back inside, I went straight for my computer. It was Thursday, 10 p.m. I started searching online. No mention of the ledge game, except for in my post on Reddit. No mention of the removal doctor, except for in my post on Reddit. No mention of Mark Bailey or Stephanie Carson, except for my post on Reddit. No mention of the hunger. No mention of the perfect being. There was nothing. It was all gone. It was as if none of it had happened. I almost felt like laughing. A wave of relief washed over me. But then I thought of Stephanie. She was gone, erased, forgotten by the world. I wished that there was a way to bring her back, but a part of me knew that bringing her back would bring everything else too. But she still didn't deserve to be erased. If I had a choice, I would have taken her place. She was special smart, would have done something important with her life. Next to her limitless potential, my life seemed dull and inadequate. I sighed and leaned back in my dad's chair. And then I saw it. It was a notebook, one of my dad's, exactly like the hundreds I had found in the boxes that filled his office. The notebook was taped underneath the desk, hidden from view unless you happened to look underneath it. I had completely missed it before. I ripped the tape away and pulled the notebook loose. There, on the front cover, were the words I was dreading to see. The MidnightPaper. I couldn't resist. I opened it. Dates, headlines. My dad had recorded the papers that had been delivered to the house. I didn't recognize any of the words or any of the headlines. They were new articles, each with the date that their corresponding paper was delivered. 3 knocks exploded across the front door. I looked at the time at the top of the computer screen. A little after midnight. No, we stopped it, right? We had to have stopped it. I made my way to the front door and looked through the peephole, only to see an older man on the other side. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting the man to have vanished, leaving a midnight paper in his place. But he was still there. "Hey there," the man said. "I live across the street there. Didn't know you lived here. I thought it was an older fella." Yeah," I said, finding my voice. "That was my dad. He passed away a few months ago." "Oh, I'm sorry. That's awful. He seemed like a nice guy. Kept to himself." "Sounds like him, all right," I said, and then froze. The man was holding something I knew all too well. "So, listen. Someone knocked at my door and left this on my doorstep. Scared the crap out of me. It seems like a bunch of us got it. Did you get one?" I looked at the welcome mat. It was empty. No, but I wouldn't open that. It might be dangerous." The man chuckled. "Oh, I was thinking the same thing. Oh well, thought I would ask around. Have a good night." "You too," I said and then froze. A bunch of us. I ran out into the street like a madman. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was at every house in the block, except for mine. Now I knew what the removal doctor had taken and where he had put it. Whatever it was that made me get the paper, and now who knows how many people had it. If you're reading this and you hear 3 knocks on your front door at midnight, do not open the package on your welcome mat. Whatever you do, do not read the paper. If anyone you know tells you that they got one too, please tell them, beg them if you have to, not to read it. I'm going to go through my dad's notebook and post what he wrote. Maybe I'll find some more answers there.